In his book, How Children Succeed, journalist Paul Tuff writes about a sixth grader, Sebastian Garcia, from Intermediate School 318 in Brooklyn at the 2011 National Junior High Chess Championship. In 1 minute, Sebastian was up by a bishop and a pawn in a pretty good position. The next minute, he was deep in trouble. His advantage squandered and his king fleeing across the board. Only a few minutes later, the inevitable happened, and Sebastian's defeat was complete. After the match, Sebastian met with his teacher, Elizabeth Spiegel. "Tell me about your game," she asked him. "The other guy was simply better," said Sebastian. "He had good skills, good strategy." Spiegel wasn't quite so sure. So she pulled out a chessboard in pieces and asked Sebastian to go through each of his moves to demonstrate what happened as they recreated the match. She showed him in that moment when he went after an easy pawn instead of keeping up the pressure on his opponent's king, how he opened the door for his opponent to escape. "Think back on this moment," Spiegel said. "When you made this move," and she captured the white pawn as Sebastian has done, "you lost the game. If you had made this move," and she put the white king in check, "you would have won the game." What Spiegel aims to do in these post-game reflections is to help students to grow by showing them all the possibilities they have, because she believes that her students don't lose because someone else is better. They lose because they haven't learned all the possibilities, or are stuck following a rule when what they need is some insight which can open up new possibilities they haven't yet seen or understood. Jesus' parables are like that too. More often than not, Jesus' parables challenge us to look at our lives and our values. The parables are designed to reveal to us an answer we know is possible, but just refuse to acknowledge because we're stuck following a rule. When we come across a parable that we find especially troublesome, like we do today, we're better off spending less time thinking about what it means and more about what the parable is designed to do, to provoke, to confront us with. We're invited to learn new possibilities. So let's go through each of the moves. The way the parable begins, there was a rich man who should prepare us. Rarely, if at all, in Luke's gospel, do things ever go well for rich men. We've heard this from Jesus lots of times before. In chapter 12, there was a rich man who wanted to build bigger barns to store the abundance he had for himself, only to find that he drops dead one night. And just a few verses after today, we'll encounter another story about a rich man who dies and finds himself in torment for not helping poor Lazarus. Rich men, it seems, for Jesus in Luke's gospel, have an obligation to provide for the community, not seek their own gratification. So the parable begins with a rich man, and this rich man has a manager. So is our focus now on the rich man or the manager? While we tend to know this parable as the parable of the dishonest steward, and in verse 8 we are told he is dishonest, was he always dishonest? Or was his dishonesty a response to being fired? How much you read this parable depends on whether you read the manager as a negative figure, conniving to try to save his neck, or as a positive figure, trying to correct a previous mistake. Regardless, the manager worries about his situation. He's too weak to dig, that is, he doesn't think he can do honest work, and he's too ashamed to beg. He's prideful and not willing to humble himself. He is desperate, and he needs to secure a future for himself, which includes wanting other people to think well of him, to invite him into their homes. So he decides to cook the books. What we get is a peek into the complex and shady world of finance. As the manager relied on the rich man for his position, so the debtors rely on the manager for theirs. They're only too happy to agree to reduce the amount of their debt. But how does the rich man find out? Everyone here is engaging in some sort of dishonest business practice. Are we to celebrate the dishonest manager's cleverness or feel guilty that he's done so well at cheating? If we're looking for meaning here, it's easy to find yourself stuck. Is this a parable about mutual dependence? Can we admire a dishonest person? I think Luke struggles to make sense of these questions as well. The rich man's, shall we call it, admiration of the manager being shrewd seems a little weird. Is Jesus saying that we, the children of light, should be shrewd too, like those bad children of this age? But it's really what Jesus says in verse 9 that's the head scratcher. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into the eternal homes. What mystery is Jesus trying to unlock? How to live in community? How to determine what ultimately matters? How to live the life God wants us to live? Again, what Jesus may be saying is less a definitive answer than it is an invitation to new possibilities we don't see clearly. Then Jesus seems to focus more on the character. The person who is faithful with a little will be faithful with much, and vice versa. The implication here is about what one does with someone else's resources. But if, as the common Jewish view goes, all things belong to God, then it's God's resources we're being unfaithful with. Jesus concludes with a statement which is not murky and confusing at all. You cannot serve God and wealth. One charitable way to understand the parable is to see it as some advice on the present with a focus on the future. Understand the dishonesty of the marketplace. Be as wise as serpents, Jesus tells us, but prepare yourself for a time when it's all gone. But if that's the lesson, then the whole preparation of the manager was through dishonesty. I'm inclined to understand this very complicated parable as a larger lesson on the ways by which we focus on wealth and status for ourselves. No one individual in this parable is ultimately deserving of admiration, however shrewd they may be. But if we return to the larger idea that all things come from God, and that whatever we possess ultimately belongs to God, then the parable can be understood as a reflection on just how ridiculous we appear when we try to secure prestige and security by our own means when God has already given it. Maybe the focus is for us to be less concerned with security and more focused on what we invest. Maybe what we need to change is our obsessive worry for things to go a certain way or reach a predetermined outcome. The parable comes, as you heard last week, on the heels of 3 parables about seeking something we've lost and what we haven't realized we've lost. If the message of the parable is about the mistakes we make as we seek for the wrong things in an attempt to secure money, prestige, and power for ourselves, what might we learn? What if this parable functions more as a mirror so that we recognize what virtue and character are, so that we don't make the mistakes of pretty much everyone in this parable by chasing after things in an effort to get what God so generously gives? I think Jesus is intentional about asking us to make some choices, to grow into who we can be, to choose to seek and search and follow, or to turn away. But the trick of the parable is a choice for something we think we have to do for ourselves, something we think that we have to earn because we have nothing And the reality is that with God, we have everything we need. And that includes a community with other people who have that same need. This parable is a reminder that we're more connected, we're more alike than we often realize. And what we aim to do for ourselves really does matter for those around us. What I think belongs to me, what I think is mine by my hard work and sweat, really comes from a system of schemes and shrewdness to which I'm sometimes blind or complicit. All that we have is not ours, it's God's. And God doesn't scheme or act from self-absorbed shrewdness. God just gives. And Jesus asks us to model that sense of trust and giving. The manager may be shrewd, but in a culture where there's more and more people trying to stand out, to get ahead, to achieve a life they think they're supposed to have, Jesus' parable is a refreshing reminder that moments when we make the wrong move because we're seeking the wrong things aren't the end. We always have an opportunity to learn again when we're chasing after a useless pawn, when we're meant to be focused on a king. Through experience, through trial and error, comes the ability not to win or lose a game, but to grow as people. Our ability to see alternative solutions to problems, to think outside the rules, is the key to changing the possibilities for ourselves and others. Our ability to manage our instinctual reactions, to practice self-control, to find the less obvious response, allows for flourishing. To prevail at chess, you need an ability to see new and different ideas, to think creatively, to resist the temptation for a cheap and easy score. Teaching chess, Spiegel says, is to teach thinking. Jesus is also teaching us to think. And as sometimes difficult as that is to grasp, the invitation from Jesus, like learning the lessons of chess, involve taking the time to slow down and think before responding. Life, as Jesus envisions it, is about understanding the mistakes we make before we make them again, to try and figure out what went wrong last time, not in order to win, but so that we all can thrive.